What are the true origins of the Nine Hells and its supreme ruler Asmodeus? The Scribe of the Damned will help us separate the mythologies from the real. Volume 2 of our mega series on the Nine Hells, right now on Riches and Liches. Welcome, adventurers. I'm Rich, and this is Riches and Liches, dedicated to dungeons, dragons, and tales of lore. Thank you for choosing to continue our journey together, as today we cover Volume 2 of our massive mega series on the Nine Hells. If you've not yet watched Volume 1, I would strongly recommend you do so to get the full lore experience. I have a direct link to that video in the description, and there should be a link at the top of the screen right now. In Volume 1, we were introduced to the Scribe of the Damned, Grylee Tomekeeper of Faerun, the accounting and writing from which these historical volumes are based. We also discussed the Nine Hells as the epic setting it is, with all its pitfalls and dangers, as well as the conflicts and contradictions and how to best mitigate them going forward. In this, Volume 2, we are completely dedicated to the origin stories of the Nine Hells and the Lord of the Nine, Asmodeus. Additionally, as I mentioned in Volume 1, at the end of each video starting today, we will close with some fiendish facts or reviled rumors. What are those, I hear you asking through your favorite display device? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Fiendish facts are just that, lesser-known facts of lore related to the topic at hand that you may not be aware of. While I will leave their status as truly canonical or not to you and your table, all information in the Fiendish facts were sourced from official publications, from Dragon and Dungeon magazine articles, which were official TSR and Wizards publications if you were not aware, all the way up to official core and supplemental resource books. On the flip side of this gold coin, we have reviled rumors. And these, well, not only are they not canonical, they range from highly contested and conflicted rumor to being lifted straight from my brain and my own ancient homebrew tome. And I say tome with some serious air quotes. That's right, forged in a prehistoric time before the iPhone, my tome is a creation wrought when the concept of digital devices took the form of a Palm Pilot. Indeed, my tome was inexpertly crafted from real paper and non-erasable pen, encased in a Walmart knockoff 90s era Trapper Keeper. Legendary indeed. It is so outdated now, in fact, it risks actually becoming cool someday, but definitely not yet. But the ideas, some fascinating, some cringeworthy, are priceless to me, and I will impart them onto you, each of you, with every volume in this series, so that they may inspire you to laugh at me, or cry for your party, or maybe, just maybe, create something really cool. So yeah, in case you missed it in all of that drama, reviled rumor equals non-canon and maybe, most likely, some form of homebrew. Okay, wow, we have so much to cover. I see literally hundreds of volumes ahead for us, so please consider supporting the work with a YouTube or Patreon subscription or a super thanks so that I can do this full-time at some point in the future and ensure we can continue this series to its conclusion and beyond. Thank you. We have a ton of ground to cover, so let's get to it. Volume 2, In the Beginning. Asmodai, Asmodeus, Asmodeus, the Lord of Lies, the Lord of the Ninth, Overlord of the Nine Hells. Whatever name or title you choose to use, he is the supreme master of the Baator and sovereign ruler of Hell. One thing not in question throughout the official lore is that Asmodeus is unquestionably the most powerful archdevil in the Dungeons & Dragons multiverse and has, in fact, only gotten more powerful as the game has advanced in years and versions. But as we look to trace the origins of both Asmodeus and the creation of Hell, also known as Baator, things start to diverge from historical fact to become the mythologies and faiths of those believers who practiced recorded or passed down knowledge from various adventurers, scholars, cults, and even the spoken tales of legend. Among these origin mythologies, there are 3 core beliefs, with some variant, that stand out as the most common, but all lie in stark conflict with one another. For the purposes of this series at large, we will be concentrating on what the Scribe of the Damned, Griley Tomekeeper, the Scholar of Candlekeep in the realm of Faerun, has written as his fact, alleged to have come from the very lips of the Lord of Lies himself. How's that for irony? But a claim whose veracity I leave up to you. Nonetheless, Griley's accounting of the true origin story and creation myth of record is that of the Pact Primeval, which I will cover in its complete entirety in Volume 3. But keep in mind that the Pact Primeval is simply a chosen direction. You have options. And today we will discuss the two alternative origin mythologies at length. And these stories of legend are not without some merit, being espoused as official knowledge in one form or another. And regardless of any truth, which really can't be ascertained one way or another without some level of doubt, these origin stories are equally fascinating and exceptional creative fuel. So I feel like they are definitely worth covering in a series that intends to be definitive and cover all aspects of a given subject. I would also offer here that there's some strong sentiment among those who study such things that these conflicting stories of origin are not merely the mistakes or retcons of the various authors who published these tales over the many versions of the game, but in fact were, perhaps, ostensibly done with intent, to either purposefully obscure or obfuscate the truth, or possibly as an in-universe foil to those who steadfastly, by wish or demand, look to solidify as fact a single origin story on such a legendary figure. As a creative world builder and dungeon master myself, I personally hope that's true, but that decision lies with you and your table. As I share the details of these origin stories, my only friendly advice here is to remind that you're not bound by any one version. You're free to adopt any facet you wish as the facts and mythologies in your world. What is canon at your table is what your table decides. Originating from the most excellent 2nd edition sourcebook Guide to Hell, there lived a bard and scholar named Christos, who offers us an early version of the origin of Asmodeus and what we now call Baator, or the Nine Hells. In a time before time, the multiverse was nothing but a swirling chaos of infinite possibilities. Gods slowly formed in the anarchy and turbulence of this primal confusion, and among them formed two champions of lawful ideology, the twin serpents of Jezrien and Ahriman. Jezrien, winged, feathered, and prismatic, she dedicated her life to the cause of good, while Ahriman, scaled and forked of tongue, embraced the darker paths of law. However, despite these ideological differences, they were together the first and foremost agents of law. Working together in all things, they took hold of each other's tail in their serpentine mouths to create the spinning ring of creation as they sought to mark the center of the cosmos, the birthplace of everything to come. Together, they used their deified powers to establish the fundamental principles of the planes, the unity of rings, the rule of threes, and the center of all. They were responsible for the ring-shaped form of the cosmos and the great wheel and the plane of neutrality called the concordant opposition. You may know this as the Outlands. However, these two equally powerful serpent deities came into conflict over the decision of which plane would be chosen as the birthplace of this new multiverse. Jezrien choosing the prismatic plane of Mount Celestia, while Ahriman chose the inverted mountain plane of Baator, which, it should be noted, according to some versions of this mythology, was at that time a paradise plane of sorts. According to legend, the two serpent gods, both of lawful alignment but with strongly opposed ideologies on its implementation, struggled mightily, neither willing to give in or let go of the other's tail, each straining to bring the other to its chosen destination. Eventually, they struggled so violently that, with their tails still in one another's grasp, they tore each other asunder. Upon this gruesome separation, Jezrien, certainly injured but a winged serpent, was able to fly up to the heavens of Mount Celestia, while Ahriman, severely injured and wingless, fell to the plane of Baator, his terrible descent burning the plane's once vibrant and verdant landscape and scarring the plane forever. His mighty impact not only formed the hellscape we know today as Baator, but also formed a vast pit called the Serpent's Trench, sometimes also referred to as the Serpent's Coil. The blood from Jazirion's damaged tail is mythologized to form the very first Kuatl creature types. Ahriman, still the Serpent of Law but wounded and now imprisoned by the laws he himself created, used his godlike power to take the form that we know as Asmodeus to rule as the sovereign lord and master of Baator, while his wound, still not healed to this day, drips the very blood that formed the first devils over which he rules, his pit fiend children. It is said in this legend as a dire warning to scholars and historians alike that no one who tells the story of the true form of Asmodeus, as I have just told you, survives more than a single day after its telling. Although rumors do exist that dusty records in the fortress of Demogorgon have archived this very knowledge. There are, of course, variants to the details of this story, the most interesting of which is the belief that the true body of Asmodeus is an evolved and transformed version of Ahriman, now taken the form of a truly massive world serpent hundreds of miles long, who resides to this very day in an unseen, undiscovered 10th layer of the Nine Hells, and the devilish form we are all familiar with today being nothing more than an aspect or avatar disguising his truly wicked serpentine form. Now there is an ultimate quest for that level 20 plus superhero group, you know, the one that's always complaining things are too easy. Good luck. I'll only offer the following quote from the Nordic Volsunga saga: "Fear not death, for the hour of your doom is set, and none may escape it." With the release of the 4th edition of the game, we are introduced to yet another alternative origin for Asmodeus, which is for all intents and purposes a retcon. In this setting, a deity representing goodness and peace presided over a pantheon called the Points of Light. This god, whose true name was lost to time, is today only referred to as He Who Was, and the 4E lore heavily intimates He Who Was as the creator of the human race in a realm called Baator. In this mythology, Asmodeus, as the most glorified and battle-tested archangel and exarch of this ancient benevolent god, was entrusted with leading a legion of angels in a millennia of battles against the enemies of law. A seminal event in the 4E origin story called the Dawn War that we will cover at some point in this iconic lore series. During the Dawn War, Asmodeus served this cryptic and unknown god loyally. However, in time, after eons of battling chaos, Asmodeus came to believe that He Who Was far too forgiving of his enemies, a sign of great weakness in the eyes of Asmodeus, who possessed such a strong lust for war, law, and punishment. During the Dawn War, a god named Tharizdun, whose form was that of a sentient void of creeping blackness, was responsible for creating the infinite abyss we know today, but was eventually defeated and imprisoned deep within his own abyssal creation. Again, we'll get into the details of the Dawn War as well as a full series on the abyssal planes in later volumes. However, as the Dawn War was ending, He Who Was assigned Asmodeus to guard the entrance to the magical prison in the depths of the abyss, now holding Tharizdun, also known to time as the Elder Elemental Eye, and eventually upon his imprisonment as the Chained God. Asmodeus, while serving in this capacity as the jailer of Tharizdun, was approached by the demon lord Pazuzu, and as detailed in the Demonomicon, the demon lord encouraged Asmodeus, who already had betrayal on his mind and in his blackening heart, to act upon his thoughts of rebellion against He Who Was. Pazuzu promised to aid the future Lord of the Nine by ensuring that Asmodeus was able to reach the very heart of the abyss in order to obtain a small piece, a fragment of an infinitely powerful shard of evil, This the very relic that Tharizdun used in the formation of the Abyss. With this help, Asmodeus was able to acquire this sliver of one of the most powerful primordial items in all the multiverse in order to create his Ruby Rod, another 4E full retcon on that infamous and legendary artifact. With the Ruby Rod, Asmodeus, growing steadily in power, returned to Baator, the realm of He Who Was, and gathered a legion of discontented angels who would join his side, in order to instigate a successful rebellion that ended in the betrayal and slaying of his master and god, He Who Was. However, with his last moments of life, He Who Was used what remained of his fleeting godlike powers to curse Asmodeus and all the angels who had followed him. These betrayers were then transformed into the first devils, and the beautiful astral dominion of Baator was forever altered, reformed in the image of the betrayer to become the prison realm known as the Nine Hells of Baator. Here, Asmodeus assumed the divine might of the fallen deity and became a god himself, albeit one trapped inside his own dominion. After slaying He Who Was, Asmodeus and his angels turned devils wiped all knowledge of the former god's true name out of fear, believing that his true name, if ever spoken again, could revive He Who Was to seek his revenge. Now, I thought maybe it's just me when I first heard this story years ago. I thought, wow, that really feels like a 4E take on Yahweh, going for that Judeo-Christian God vibe. Good and just God, betrayed and slain by his servant. So I did a little research for this video, and yeah, that was kind of the whole developmental angle, to take the Christian religion as we know it and do a what if the bad guys had won type of story. And I have to say, once again, 4E, just across the board, taking established canonical lore and kind of tossing it into the garbage bin. I mean, we're talking a full reboot on so many aspects of the game's lore. But if nothing else, you have to respect the boldness, the audacity of the 4th edition. And I know I'm building a bit of a reputation as a 4E hater, but I'm going to push back just a little bit. I think there are some cool ideas in 4th edition, including this origin story. Lots of good to great ideas that if in a separate game would be better received, at least for me personally. The issue is that the vast majority of the cool 4E stuff is not additive to the canon, really at all. It comes at the expense of it as a reboot. The fact that the lore of 4E more often than not feels purpose-built to replace the old lore, which, given the business side of the game and the bad blood Wizards had with some of the original TSR creators that I've talked about in other videos, I actually do understand, but understanding and acceptance are two very different things. And I think for me, I just have a hard time accepting the wholesale replacement of what, at the time of the 4th edition launch, was 30 years of established canonical lore. And since we're talking about 4th edition, I need to take just a moment here for a quick side note. As a dungeon master and world builder for well over 2 decades, someone who really tries to take some pride in knowing the lore of the game, but who also admittedly mostly skipped 4E entirely, I have to say the research on 4E that I have done as I prepared for this series has been a mix of fascination and absolute bewilderment. The further I dig, the more I really want to get a behind-the-scenes look at the development mindset that went into some of these changes. And I'm not trying to take a shot at 4E here, but the change from 3.5 or the 3rd edition as a whole to 4E was such a radical departure that I'm convinced more than ever that some fascinating real-world lore is buried somewhere in there and needs to be mined and shared. In the past, I had always dismissed the 4th edition as Wizards' desire to make their game more like a video game, following that early 2000s MMO trend. I always called it the World of Warcraft effect. But looking at it closer now, I'm really starting to think I was vastly oversimplifying. And I'm convinced now that it goes way deeper than that. In fact, I'm so convinced that there are some amazing stories to be told from the developmental angle that I've made a note to myself. As this channel grows, as we start to get a little bit of clout, I'm going to make it a goal to seek some official on or off the record interviews with some of the 3rd and even 4th edition designers to kind of get to the bottom of that. Is that something you would be interested in, or is real world lore too out of our wheelhouse? Please do let me know. We have covered 2 origin stories today in Volume 2. Wow, we are just getting started. But one origin story remains, the Pact Primeval. The truth? Your truth? I'll let you decide in Volume 3. But don't click away just yet. Before we close this episode, as promised, at the end of each volume in this series, I would like to provide you with a few quick fiendish facts and/or reviled rumors. The former, as facts, can be considered Dungeons & Dragons canon, and in fact will likely be covered in more detail at a later time. But the latter, as rumor, can change from contested mythology to flat-out homebrew. But do not fear, I'll make sure you're clear on which is which. In this volume, I have 2 fiendish facts for you. We will really dive into the rumors and homebrew once we enter each of the 9 layer volumes so that we can world build some domain-specific creations. Fiendish fact number 1. Among the litany of named archdevils and archdukes that constantly politic and scheme, looking to wrest for more power and control over the planes and dominions of the 9 hells, only 2 can say with utmost certainty that they've been with Asmodeus since the beginning. These OG devils, if you will, 2 former angels turned devil, were among those that battled with Asmodeus in those early days during the formation of the cosmos. Baator and Mephistopheles stood side by side with Asmodeus and were among the first to join him in his rebellion against the celestial forces and in the formation of the 9 hells. It is therefore of little doubt why both Mephistopheles and Baator are the longest ruling archdukes, although at least one of these OG devils has long looked to overthrow the Lord of the Nine. But that's a story for another volume. Fiendish fact number 2. One can make a strong argument, should they choose to, that the infernal armies of the 9 hells have done as much, or perhaps even more, to stave off chaos from the mortal realm. Yes, that means you, dear listener, than have all the gods and angels of the lawful good plane of Mount Celestia. Well, that should give you a moment of pause to contemplate. As my father would always tell me, it's not the message, it's the manner in which you deliver it. And that concludes Volume 2. Join us for Volume 3, where we will cover the Pact Primeval in exacting detail. We are just getting started here, so much more to cover, and I look forward to each of you joining me on this journey. Please consider following on Twitter at Riches and Liches, checking out our Patreon, Discord, YouTube channel memberships for as little as $2, or a super thanks, the equivalent of buying that man a drink at the local tavern for a job well done. And if you feel like I earned it, sub and ring that bell to help me grow this amazing community. Thanks for listening, and as always, until next time, please remember, the only limitation at your table is your imagination.